Zach Brandon. How's it going? Zach is a mental performance consultant, right?
That's
And
right. Yeah, good morning, Kidway.
good morning, man. For the Diamondbacks, I believe, worked with me at IMG for a period where we tried to integrate a bit of essentially on field kind of performance observations in addition to the coaching, which I thought was really fascinating when you came with the suggestion. Anyway, thank you for being here, and it's all you.
Yeah, thanks, Kidway. Can you guys, is the connection good so far?
Connection's good so far. PJ, if you can unshare yours.
I don't know how to do.
Oh, wait, I guess I can do that. Yeah.
Arrêtez. No, I don't know.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we're all good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, first off, Kidway, thanks for the invite, first and foremost. I'm super excited to be on here and to share. And so far from what I've heard over the last couple of days, this has been a really, really great event, some really bright minds, and I've definitely learned some things from the other folks who presented. One of the things that I wanted to acknowledge too is just how much I appreciate what Tracy shared yesterday. Tracy's on my Mount Rushmore of mentors and people that have had a big influence on me. So there is no shortage of pressure today to follow up and make sure that I don't give her a bad reputation. So there's no pressure going into today. No, I'm excited, and I appreciate those who are here. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I know it's early for some. It was up at 6 a.m. and I decided to just stay in my bed and basically listen to the conference podcast style. So if anybody is doing that now, I promise I won't be offended in the slightest. So I appreciate those who are here bright and early and excited to share with everybody. So with that, I'll jump in. So as Kidway said, I had the fortune of working with him during my time at IMG Academy in Florida. So I spent close to 3 years there working with a range of different athletes, track and field being one of them. And I had an absolute blast. It was a great experience. Track and field is not my native language, I will admit. Baseball is kind of my background, and as Kidway alluded to, that's where I'm at now, kind of serving as our mental skills coordinator for the Arizona Diamondbacks, where I oversee all aspects of it from the major league level to the minor league level for players and coaches. So that's my current role. My background's not track, but I had to put this visual up of the new Hayward Field in Eugene. Eugene is home for me, so I drove by it actually a couple of days ago, and it looks immaculate. So I can't wait for Worlds to be held, and I'm really looking forward to that. So I had to use that as my intro for sure. So what I wanted to do this morning, I recognize that it's early, but I'm going to kind of go back in time just a little bit. And for those who don't know who's in this photo, this is Aristotle, and he's largely considered one of the greatest thinkers of all time. He wrote about a range of different subjects across a variety of different disciplines, one of which being physics. And one of the theories that he held for a very long time was this concept of how he viewed gravity. And so I'm going to start with a physics lesson, and I will warn you, physics was the worst grade that I got in high school in all of the classes that I took. So I'm by no means expressing to be a physics expert. This has what on the surface will look nothing to do with track and field or throwers, but I promise I'll connect it. And the concept that Aristotle believed is that all objects crave to be in quote unquote this natural place within the center of the universe, which was Earth. And as we know now, that's no longer the popular theory. That's no longer the theory that's been validated or scientifically supported. However, what I think is pretty interesting is that this theory was unchallenged for nearly 2,000 years. For a very long time, we had this belief towards gravity that we now no longer know is the case. It's been shown to no longer be valid. And I started to think about this from a book that I read, and I promise I haven't purposefully rotated this book. But this is actually what the cover of it looks like, which is quite trippy if you actually have a hard copy of it like I do. This book is called But What If We're Wrong? And the whole premise behind it is asking this question of, what if certain things that we've believed for a very long period of time were actually outdated? What if things that we once believed to be true over time we've discovered are no longer the case? Even things that we currently, even current beliefs. And as I was thinking about and as I was reading this book, I actually thought it provided a nice introduction for what I wanted to talk about today as it relates to stress and high performance. Because what I've discovered over time, especially in the last year, is that I've been wrong about stress. I've focused a lot on the harmful, the negative side effects of stress. And what I'd like to offer today is maybe an alternative look to it. Not for you to totally disregard everything else that you've held about stress, but maybe just changing your relationship to it. Because what we've discovered is that when you change your relationship to stress, it actually can transform its effect on you, which is pretty remarkable. And you've heard from a lot of other great practitioners over the last couple of days about mindset and the importance of mindset. And I'm hoping to tie together a lot of the things that Natasha, Justin, and Tracy spoke of. So I'm really excited to speak on that. So it's interesting. I did a quick Google search, and when you type in stress and you look at some of the news headlines, these are some of the common words that get brought up on it. So if you look at this, a lot of these are what we would consider to be negative, right? Things like toxic, things like avoid, things like depression, anxiety, sickness, illness. There's a lot of words on here that we have come to associate that we want to avoid. And as a result, I think this is part of the challenge that we've experienced from a societal perspective is we have heard so much about the harmful side effects of stress. Not a lot of people have talked about how stress can actually be really helpful and not a barrier for performance, but actually a resource for performance. And so what I wanted to do today is, again, offer up an update. I read one article that said the headline was "Why Your Work Stress Will Kill You," right? So it's no surprise why when we see all of these headlines, you also see a lot of headlines of tips to reduce stress, tips to lower it, tips to relieve it, all of these things that basically indicate that we should try to remove it. We should try to lower its impact on us. And today, the whole premise of this session will be to hopefully offer up a way where you can actually help either yourself, if you're a performer, if you're coaching athletes or a practitioner, wherever you're at. We all experience stress in different ways, and hopefully this will help you kind of change your relationship to it. So as I said, really, I don't want you to disregard everything that you've heard, but hopefully just much like your phone will experience an update on occasion, unless it's my mom's phone, which is an iPhone 4, which she no longer receives updates. So, but other words, in most cases, we all get an update from time to time. That's what I want to offer today, is that when you can update your belief system and change your mind about stress, you can actually change your body's physical response to it. And so that's really what I would like to spend the next 20 minutes or so discussing, and then open it up to some questions. So you don't have to respond right now. Again, I know I don't want anybody to put on their video if they're still laying in bed. So, but what I'd like you to think about is, in the past year, how much stress would you say that you've experienced? Has it been a minimal amount, not very much? Has it been moderate, or a lot? So as you take a moment to think about the amount of stress that we experience, pretty much everybody on this call, because we're human, you've experienced one level of one of these three levels of stress. And there was a research study that was done back in 2012. And what they found is that if you said that you experienced a lot of stress within the past year, that you had a 43% increased risk in dying, which I don't mean to start off as very morbid this morning. And I don't want to scare anybody, because there's actually a glimmer of hope in this. There was a caveat to this study. And what they found in studying over 28,000 people over a 10-year period was that this increased risk in death was only true for people who viewed stress as bad and harmful. And that the perception towards stress actually was what was most important. So if you actually go back to this, what they actually found is people that were living the most meaningful lives and had the most satisfaction also answered that they experienced a lot of stress. The difference, though, was in that second question where they asked them, how do you view stress? Do you view it as bad and harmful, or do you view it as good and enhancing? And so this becomes, I think, a really important segue into today of changing our definition of stress, changing how we talk about it with athletes, with performers, because it's actually a tool that we can use to help us achieve peak performance. And so that's something that I have spent the last year or so reshifting my beliefs around and spending a lot more time helping our athletes embrace stress. And because you're going to experience it, that's the part of being human. And in doing so, it can help you in I think many aspects of your life, whether it's throwing in track and field, or whether it's in whatever performance setting you might be competing in. So that's kind of what I wanted to offer today. So for a definition, I like this definition from a researcher at University of Stanford. Her name is Kelly McGonigal, and she wrote a book called The Upside of Stress, which if I were to recommend in my top 3 books of all time, Upside of Stress is likely at the top. It's really good, and I really like this definition that she provides, which is stress is what arises when something you care about is at stake. And I like this a lot because what it indicates is that rather than being a sign that something is wrong in your life, feeling stress can actually be this barometer of how engaged you are in things, activities, relationships that are important to you. And so as she kind of alludes to in this book, we can't always control the stress that we experience in our lives, but we can choose our relationship to it. And this is, I think, really important because we don't stress over things that we don't care about. Stress and purpose and meaning are very linked. And so, depending on however much stress you felt like you experienced on this scale, it's actually a signal of how much you are engaged in things that you truly care about. That's what she kind of offers. And that's why I really like this definition of stress. And that's kind of how I'll be viewing it moving forward for the rest of this conversation. So sources of stress in athletics and performance, this is not an exhaustive list. There's many other things, but as we know, athletes are going to experience stress from competitions, from training, expectations either of themselves or from other people, right? There's fear of failure that goes into that competition pressure. There's a relationship, so whether that's off the track or off the field, or whether that's with a coach that they're working with. Injuries are obviously a major stressor for a lot of athletes. And then also in most cases, depending on who's this call, whether your athletes are also going to school or they're working outside of being a performer, there's also that source of stress as well. So there's all these different sources of stress that our athletes experience, and there's different responses that we can actually have towards it. Traditionally, we've thought of fight, flight, or freeze. For a long time, it was fight or flight. And this is what researchers would kind of categorize as this kind of threat response. This is kind of an evolutionary survival strategy that we've had that is now a little outdated and mismatched for modern life. And as humans themselves have evolved, the stress response has actually evolved over time. And we now can say that there's actually a couple of other approaches and responses to stress that are actually really valuable. And that's the ones that, the latter is the one I'm going to talk about the most. And one is Tend and Befriend, which basically says that stress unleashes this instinct in all of us to protect our tribe. It reminds us of the people in our lives that we truly care about. And so when we experience stress, it actually can increase our desire for connection and being around other people. And this is, I think, very relevant given the current state of things, both with the pandemic as well as everything that's been going on from a societal perspective here in the United States over the last week or so. And so that's one response that we can have. The one that I really want to tap into today is what researchers are calling the challenge response. The challenge response, what they found is when athletes are in the zone, as we call it, or in flow, they're actually showing signs of being in this challenge response. As Tracy alluded to yesterday with what she talked about, the growth mindset, a big component of a growth mindset is this idea that you embrace challenges, that you see the challenge in front of you as an opportunity. You anticipate what will come as you take head on whatever challenge you're being tested with. Rather than being something that you're fearful of, you're excited about that obstacle. And again, stress is becoming, it's this view that stress is actually more of a resource for us and a tool that we can use to enhance our performance rather than this barrier that's something that we have to avoid. So what I wanted to offer today is for coaches, for practitioner, hopefully some practical strategies that you can adopt to develop a challenge response, because that's ultimately what matters. It's great that we can talk about how important it is that our response to stress, but I think the thing that I spend the most time with our baseball players working on is how can we train it? How can we get better at our response? Some of you may have seen this. This is from, I saw this in Urban Meyer, former football coach at Ohio State. He talks about E plus R equals O, which is this concept of event plus response equals outcome. And I really like this. And I think this is actually a very simple, easy formula for how we can think about stress. And stress being the event, the E, and ultimately what matters that the research is showing us from a stress standpoint is how we choose to respond to it. And I think this is really important. And I can't credit who I heard this quote from. I will admit it wasn't from me, but this has become one of my favorite quotes. And I think it becomes very fitting towards this conversation. And it's this idea that perspective is the only thing that can change the outcome without changing any of the facts. And I really like this quote. I think it captures how important our mindset is, how much how important perspective is for us as athletes. And so over the next few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about how can we get better at this perspective? How can we get better at our response and maybe even create some space between that event and that response? And I think there's a few different strategies that we can look to, things that we use with our baseball players that anybody can adopt and incorporate. So with that, I call this kind of the ABCs of stress with our athletes. It's the term that I've started to use. And the first one is about acknowledging it. The key is just becoming aware of the stress that you're experiencing and allowing yourself to accept whatever that is that you're feeling. And so one of the core techniques or practices that we utilize, and Tracy indicated this yesterday, that it was going to be something that I touched on, is this concept of mindfulness. And Natasha talked about it as well. This is a really core component of our mental skills department and program with the Diamondbacks. It's something that we offer to our players anytime that we're physically with them in person leading up to a game. we dedicate time within the training, the practice schedule for them to come in and do 15 minutes of mindfulness, 10 to 15 minutes of mindfulness in a space that we have at our spring training facility. We do it on the road. We do it at our major league field. We do it. It's a huge part of what we do. And mindfulness is really a great exercise and practice for learning how to stay open to what you sense, to what you feel, rather than trying to shut it down or avoid them. And I think this is, and that response or that approach towards stress is just as important as anything. And mindfulness applies it across the board, but I'll talk about it more from a stress standpoint. So I put this visual up because there's probably nowhere else in the world where I get more anxiety or stress than traffic. Now, I have not driven here. This is actually in India, and just watching this, I get anxiety. And for those of you who are watching at home, if you're experiencing anxiety, I apologize. But I like this visual a lot because I actually think it's a great visual for how what mindfulness does for us. It really helps us navigate and untangle the 60 to 80,000 thoughts that we have on a daily basis. As you can see, just like in traffic, there's a lot of times where things get bunched up. There's a lot going on. Sometimes we have to stop and kind of slow ourselves down and hit the pause button in our lives. Also, to navigate this environment, we have to be present. We have to be focused on the task at hand, right? There's all sorts of distractions. There's all sorts of outside variables that are outside of our control. And what we have to do is ultimately figure out how can we disentangle those, create some space, and get into the present moment, because that's really what mindfulness helps us do. And so you may have seen this visual. It's a popular visual used for within the mindfulness space, but really it's about, I think, being in the present moment and being open to what you're experiencing in this kind of non-judgmental, through this non-judgmental lens. And the quote that I hear a lot that has always resonated with me is to be where your feet are. And so that's how I kind of conceptualize mindfulness. I'll talk in a minute about how sometimes there is value to shifting ahead to the future, right? And I'm going blank on who, I think it was Justin yesterday who talked about if then and kind of contingency planning and preparing for the future and obstacles that you might be confronted with. There's certainly value to that. But what we know is that attention is so important to performance. And most of the work that I do with baseball players is focused on developing attention, so that way our athletes can have their focus on the right thing at the right time when it matters. And I think if we ask our athletes to expect for them to demonstrate that on demand in a performance setting, if they've never practiced it, then I think that's a big leap. And so for me, that's why mindfulness is so integral to the work that we do, is it helps us practice it. So how I think about it is I hear all of these quotes. These are really common mental game terms and phrases that get tossed around. There's several others that I'm sure exist not only in sport but also within the throwing community. And I think if you were to kind of peel back the layers of each of these and identify what's the underlying thread, mindfulness is a way to practice each of these, right? We can say these things and they sound really good, but I think sometimes we forget, well, how do we develop that in our athletes? And I think mindfulness offers a gateway into that. And so I know that this already exists. So I saw this quote. I really liked it from Tom Walsh. This was back in 2018. And he shared how meditation and mindfulness has become such an integral component to the work that to his preparation. And so this is, again, something that a lot of high profile athletes are becoming more and more vocal about, even within the track and field community, which I think is really exciting. And for those who are working maybe with younger athletes, like when I was at IMG, I tried to find as many of these types of quotes as I could, highlighting high profile athletes and performers and sharing with athletes how they're utilizing these skills. So I really like that one. I put this quote in here, this next quote in here, because not so much because it ties into mindfulness, but I think it taps into what I referenced earlier too, with kind of moving ahead to the future and the value you can have of seeing the potential challenges and stress that you might encounter. So one of the exercises that I'll do with our baseball players at times is I have them visualize ahead of time the potential stressors, the potential pressures that they might experience in a competition setting, and have them really try to recreate that feeling, because that emotion is really powerful. Have them recreate it sitting in our room, and then once they have it, anticipate how they want to choose to respond in those particular situations. And this was something that I saw this quote. Tracy can probably speak to this far more than I could, having spent some time with a lot of different athletes, including Ryan. But this is something that I think is a really another important mental skill that kind of ties into all of this, that athletes can use to work on their response to stress. So so again, going back to the ABCs of stress, I think the next one is befriend, which sounds a little interesting again, but I think what's really important to think about here is that when we get stressed, it's because our goals or the things that we truly care about are on the line. And so we have to take action. We get stressed when our values are threatened. So we defend them. We get stressed when we need courage. We get stressed, or when we get stressed, we need courage. We get stressed so we can connect with other people, right? Stress is really important. So one of the things that also can help in choosing our response to stress is identifying your values, identifying the things that you care most about. Because when you identify what you do care about, it can actually free you up from the things that you don't care about. And so values for me become really important. And I actually probably do more work with values with our players than I actually do with goals. Goals work really well, and I like to ask players at times what their goals are. But I would say the vast majority of the work that I do is actually more focused on values. And the reason being is actually a good example is what's kind of gone on over the last couple of months. There were a lot of athletes across all different sports and performance settings who had a lot of goals going into this year. And unfortunately, a lot of those were ripped out from underneath them, and they didn't even have a chance or any control over that. And so I like values because values offer us an opportunity to be successful wherever our feet are. And I think that's something that is this notion, it's this ongoing process. No matter where you are in the moment, when you identify your values, it can help you determine what actions you can take in the moment that are aligned with those. And so it helps you redefine how you view success. And so it's something that we've spent a lot of time over the last couple months on, of helping some of our players understand is that there are a lot of things that they value outside of just the baseball realm, that there's a lot of things outside of their life. We have athletes who are finally getting some time to be with their families and spend time with their kids, and family is a really important value to them. And they've been afforded that opportunity amidst everything that's gone on. And so values, though, we have to become aware of those. And it's actually something that's very, it's been one of the more heavily researched interventions. I don't use that word too often, but it's from a research perspective, it's been one of the most effective psychological interventions ever studied. And so one of the exercises that I would encourage athletes to think about, a practical strategy that you could take back or apply yourself, is to simply write down, what are the things that you value? What are the things that you care about? Ask yourself, what's meaningful to you in your life? And what they've actually found is that there's a lot of benefits to this one-time mindset intervention. Even studies showing that if you take 10 minutes to write down what you value, it actually can have benefits that last for over months, and in some cases even longer than that. And those benefits can range from helping you feel more powerful, in control, more strong or stronger, can help you feel more loving, connected, and empathetic towards others. There's even studies that talk about it can enhance self-control and reduce unhelpful kind of rumination after stressful experiences. So it ties in very closely to stress because, as I mentioned at the beginning, stress and meaning and purpose are linked. We don't stress about the things that we don't care about. And so again, when you can identify the things that you do care about, it goes back to controlling the controllables. It helps free you up to let go of the things outside of your control. And so I think taking some time to write down your values and the things that mean the most to you in your life is a really simple strategy that one could adopt to help develop some of that response. And then the last one is C for channel. So the next thing that you can do when you experience a stressful event and choosing your response to it, I think what helps in a lot of cases is to channel that energy and channel the energy that you experience from that stress, because ultimately stress can kind of provide for us free energy. Your heart starts to pound as blood is pumping to different organs. You might feel or you might experience feelings of tension, which you can remind yourself of the strength that your muscles are experiencing. You might feel butterflies or sweat, which is kind of just a physical reminder of this being something that's meaningful to you. And so I spend a lot of time working with athletes, helping them do this particular skill. I tell our guys that if you want to study who the best breathers are on the planet, which is a weird thing to say because it's something we're all doing. But if you want to study the best in the world, generally I recommend snipers or babies. They're really, both of them, two very different populations, but I would say that they're probably the best to study from because of the dynamics or the dynamics of breathing and how to do it kind of properly. But what I want to talk about today is actually a shift from this notion that we encouraging athletes to breathe, to calm down. That can work for some athletes, and it's still something that I use with certain players, those for certain cases. But I've actually started to use the breath for athletes in a very different way. I've started to use it more from an attention and focus standpoint, and helping athletes just utilize their breath to be centered and to channel and use it to channel the energy that they're feeling. And so a great example of this, one of the greatest golfers in history, he talks about something that I think not too many people would expect. And he talks about how much nerves he experienced. Even after all he has achieved in his career, Tiger Woods says he still gets nervous every single day. But he talks about how important it is for him to channel it and use it. And what I like about this a lot is because that when we tell people to calm themselves down, the tricky part about that is it basically tells them that they don't have the resources. It implies that they don't have the resources to handle whatever that situation is. So instead, I've tried to shift to this notion of helping them channel that energy and use it. And there's a lot of research showing across different performance settings that when we approach performance from a standpoint of being excited, it's actually more optimal than feeling calm, which is very counter to what most of us believe. It's very counter to what I believed for a very long time. And so now it's about how can we help you channel this nervous energy and remind yourself that you do have what it takes and you can trust yourself when you step out onto the track or into the thrower circle. So Tracy yesterday mentioned Joe Kovacs and his performance at the World Championships in Doha. And it was cool. I was thinking about this and I was kind of going through some of my old slides that I used at IMG. And I happened to find this headline that was shortly after his performance there at the World Championships. And he talked, and if I highlighted this particular section, that before his last throw that won him the competition, he talks about taking a big breath. And there's a little bit more to it. I couldn't fit in everything in this slide, but I thought what I thought about that was it's probably a good indication of somebody who's taking this breath just to kind of get himself locked in, to channel all that energy that you need to be able to throw this 16 pound ball that you're throwing, the shot put. And that I think is a very valuable mental skill. I'm kind of all over the place there. So I talk a lot about utilizing the breath. It's one of the most popular mental skills techniques. But what I've done is I've changed how I view it. I've changed my perception of it to instead use the breath to channel that energy and then be able to harness that into whatever it is that you're doing. So for me, this has become kind of the ABCs, I guess, of how I view stress and how I help our athletes develop a better response to stress. And just anecdotally from the athletes that we've worked with over the last year and a half with the Diamondbacks, it's something that a lot of our guys have really appreciated and embraced, because it's helped them better understand how important the mind is, how important our perspective is towards the events that we experience in our life, whether they're stressful or not, and how ultimately our perspective does influence the outcome towards whatever that we face. So for me, again, this may be counter to some of the things that different folks you've learned over time, or what societal's views are. I highly recommend The Upside of Stress by Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She dives into this. It's an area of research that she's explored very heavily, and it's a very well scientifically backed book in terms of the amount of research that she adds in, but it's very simple to read. It's very user friendly. And so if you want to get better at your challenge response and just get better at stress, then that would be, I think, a great resource to explore. But I don't know how much time I left, or I don't even know if I went over Kibwe. So I get going talking, and sometimes I'm not great at slowing down. I just get excited. So, but for those, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now, or feel free to message me offline as well.
Yeah, buddy, you're good on time. Thank you. That was really good. And I'm just now writing The Upside of Stress myself. So everybody, I think we have about 5 minutes or so for some questions. Tracy, what did you think? Are you still on there? Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm like a proud mama bear right now. So
what's Zach, differences between, I suppose, like that high school population, so teenagers versus adults / grown men? I don't know. Yeah, you're in the pro side. So like, grown men, like, are there differences, and like, what are they?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the words that stands out to me that I see a lot in our guys at the major league level, this is even a difference between guys I see at the major league level versus guys who are starting out in pro ball, is discipline. Like it amazes me, as Tracy and Justin both spoke to a little bit, the dangers of being too concerned with how you might feel in a particular situation. I talk about the difference between discipline and motivation with some of our guys, and motivation tends to waver. There's a lot of times where you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like motivated to go and do something. I think one of the biggest things that I see with some of our higher level players is just the discipline to do things even when you don't want to do them, even to do things when you don't feel like it, when you feel tired, when you feel fatigued, when you're just bored or you don't feel like it. So I would say discipline is kind of something that I think is really stands out to me amongst kind of the higher level the higher level guys that I work with on a daily basis. But I'd be curious to hear if others within the throwing community, if that's something that's similar or not for your guys' world as well.
Yeah, I would say so. Both from the perspective of what level they're at, and then also, you know, what they're training for. So, for instance, this year and the Olympics being postponed, you're hearing lots of stories of people not really being able to stay, or just the difficulties, I should say, of trying to stay on that path. Okay, here. So from Bill, how do you handle a rookie making their major league debut, which would compare to a thrower going to their first major championship?
Oh, that's a fun question. So our major league manager is phenomenal, and we've been doing over the last month or so. We've been doing kind of these mindset interviews, myself and him, with our major league players, and he got up there in front of. We're interviewing our major league guys for all of our minor leaguers, and he got up there in front of our minor league players and told them that the most important thing for them when they get called up to the big leagues is to be themselves. That's all they ask for. And so for me, I do think that that's the first reminder for guys who are getting called up, and you're getting to experience that kind of pinnacle moment in your career is reminding them to be authentic to themselves, and that all that work that they have done in preparation for that moment should be an indicator that they are prepared and that they can trust themselves. And so that for me is, I think the authenticity piece is really critical. That we see a lot of guys that when they have a hard time sticking around at the major league level, it's because they get up there and all of a sudden they see other guys around them who are doing different things, and they think that they all of a sudden have to be somebody that they're not. We had a relief pitcher who talked about how he got up there and he started, like everybody's talking about, learn from the veterans, learn from the older guys. So he starts asking all these questions. Meanwhile, he started to incorporate all these different things into his routine that kind of took him away from being himself and being kind of the best version of who he was as a performer and as a person. So I would say the first recommendation for guys that we try to remind them is to just be themselves, that all that work you've done in preparation for that moment didn't all of a sudden didn't just get erased just because you got called up. And then I think the other one too is it's very similar to what I shared today of just reminding them of how exciting that particular moment is, and just allow them to embrace that energy that they experience. It was a very cool moment. I was with one of our rookies when they got called up to the big leagues, and we were on the road this year, and he comes up to me about 4 hours before the game, and he said, "I'm freaking out." And he was like, "Can we do a meditation session?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so we went in and we did a meditation session. And part of that, I actually had him do a little bit of the visualization that I showed with the quote from Ryan Krauser, where he talks about visualizing, and I had him visualize what he was about to experience. So it was a little bit more than just meditation, but I had him visualize what he was about to experience out on the field. And I encouraged him to try to envision the emotion that he wanted to have when he was out there, which was the excitement. And so I think that I think a combination of those two things are important for me and the work I do.
For me personally, to kind of piggyback on that question, looks like we have one more question after this, is how do you differentiate between those two things, like someone essentially trying to stay true to themselves while also that guy is, you know what I mean? Like a legitimate behavior or kind of tactic, I suppose, that you might want to kind of experiment with while also staying true to yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really like some of the things that Tracy talked about yesterday as it relates to routines. And she brought up some great, I think, examples of that. I would say, how do you balance that? You know, I think part of it too, it goes back to, so one of the things that we talk about, I think I tie a lot of this back into preparation, and that baseball, we're fortunate because you have 162 games. So you have a lot of opportunities to experiment and for trial and error and to kind of figure it out. I encourage a lot of our guys to, whatever routines that they're doing on game day, to try to incorporate them or some degree of them when it's not their game day, right? Every guy has a different routine leading up to the day. Like a pitcher, every 5 days, they have a different routine each day leading up to a start. But helping them in training figure out ways in which they can practice some of those routines. So we basically divide training into learning and performing. There are some moments in training where we focus on performance and we're all about execution. We're trying to get our guys to be in that competitive mindset and externally focused and just focused on the task at hand and executing. And then there are times where we want them to focus on learning. And in those moments, those are the sessions where I try to encourage them that learning doesn't just occur with the physical skills. It can also occur with mental skills, in this case, routines being a big part of that. So in training, I try to encourage guys to practice and refine those things and kind of figure out what works best for them.
Awesome. And this can probably be our final question from Yolanda. How do you work, support / coax an athlete who may be resistant to working on mental performance?
Yeah, good question. When I was at IMG, one of the things that I would do is I kind of shared some of the quotes. I think finding quotes of high profile athletes who are doing this type of work, I think that's one thing, just to kind of help them see that this is normative. That, again, to use kind of an analogy that a colleague of ours in our field uses, is you don't have to be sick to get better. And it's this notion that you can always work on mental skills. It's a very normal thing regardless of your skill level. But I also think, so I don't have kids, but for those of you who have kids, you can think of it like this. I have dogs, and I will say that not going to make a complete comparison between the two, but there are times where I have to give my dog, medicine or something that they don't want, and they don't want to take it, right? There are times where you have to give your child medicine. And so how do you give them medicine? You disguise it into something that they do like, right? Like you put it in something else. And so I would say that occurs a lot. And that was something that Kibwe and I were fortunate to do a couple years ago, where we got to be on a panel and we talked about can you incorporate mental skills into training, because that's what usually athletes care the most about. And so how can we, or into physical training, I should say. And so I think for us, that's something that we try to do, is we try to incorporate mental skills into different aspects of training, things that they're already doing, things that they enjoy. When you kind of reverse engineer the parts of practice that players really like, our guys like competitions. So we try to incorporate mental skills into mental performance training into competitions in practice. So for us, those would be my suggestions, is add the medicine in with something that they like, and remind them too of how normative it is, especially now here in 2020 within the world of high performance. Hopefully that kind of answers the question.
Excellent. Yes. Thanks, Zach. Let's thank you for being here, man. That was really nice. Appreciate that. If anyone else has anything else to say, or some more questions, go ahead and you can reach out to Zach or reach out to me, and I'll connect you guys. So now